what I will focus on is the question of ideology, which is one of the key elements in the study of cinema. And also, I must say that there has been, in the course of cinema studies history, there have been many ups and downs. So initially, you see, if you go to before the Second World War, there is no distinction between popular cinema and art cinema. It doesn't exist. It's only post-war, from the 50s or late 40s onwards, that this distinction begins to appear. It's a very productive distinction because, in one way, because it helps individual filmmakers to make films without being part of any movement or of an industry or something, right? And film festivals, as we know, were very useful for giving, some exposure to such creative, individual, creative talent, because of cinema's reliance on technology and finance, etc. It was always inclined to go in the industrial direction, to be an industry. And so in that, to enable individualized filmmaking activity required some outside support. And so that support system comes into existence with the film festivals and governments. Like, for instance, the Indian government begins to take an interest in the 50s after the first, international film festival was held here in India in 1952. So there is a new kind of excitement that it generates. So how to, the whole idea of good cinema, etc., comes into existence, and meanwhile the industry has become huge also. Hollywood is the dominant film industry in the world, and everywhere, it's like the French, especially in Europe, were very worried about the influence of Hollywood. So the idea of a new cinema, a new kind of cinema, which breaks with that. So this is your paradigm. One hand, industry; on the other hand, individual creative talent, enabled by, funding coming from state or enlightened individuals, rich people, right? Because otherwise there's no scope for it. Now, here in this division, unfortunately what happens is, the situation that prevailed in pre-Second World War, in the world over, it becomes a thing of the past. That is, a kind of cinema like Charlie Chaplin, art cinema or commercial cinema. I mean, there's no such, you can't make such a distinction in his case. I mean, if Charlie Chaplin is not art, then what is film art, right? You can say very well. But if Charlie Chaplin is art, then he's a commercially successful filmmaker, and so on. I mean, even Satyajit Ray, etc. In Bengal, Satyajit Ray is a commercially successful filmmaker, reasonably, not like Bombay, but somewhere there. So these distinctions, in a way, film studies adopted these distinctions. That is, they said art cinema only and not commercial. Then after some time they said commercial cinema only, not art, because this is people's cinema, that is elite cinema, and so on. These kinds of arguments have taken place in cinema studies, but I think on the whole, the, the, the sort of enlightened position, if you like, is that which says, well, good films can come from any sector, this or that. So for instance, art cinema can also become a stereotyped kind of thing. So once you set up a certain format, it becomes possible for some people without the creative talent that goes into individual filmmaking to make a routine, something which looks like something only for the sake of awards, etc. And commercial cinema, on the other hand, because commercial cinema is not devoid of talent, once in a while they come up with interesting and artistically satisfying films and so. So basically the distinction would be between a film that challenges you as a spectator, a film that provokes you to thought, a film that gives you a new experience of the visual image and the aesthetic, a new aesthetic experience, etc. So this is a way of breaking away from this dichotomy, to say, let us look at cinema from this angle. What is the, what film has given you that pleasure, that thought-provoking kind of material? What has made you think? What has made you? What has changed your perspective on things? Right? So that can happen anyway across, I believe, various sort of subdivisions of what cinema is. So aesthetics and ideology, the title of this, so on the one hand, the question of film appreciation is a very important aspect of film education. Now actually film education is what is a bigger category than both film appreciation and film criticism or film theory. Why is it so? I think that people who are ordinary citizens of contemporary modern democratic societies are faced with all of this cinema. That is, a popular cinema is not something you can choose to ignore. It's all around you. It's engulfing you. The atmosphere is full of the signifiers of the popular, right? So, film education consists of two aspects based on this understanding. One aspect of film appreciation is to know how to watch a film, to be able to appreciate, just as to appreciate classical music or any music, you need to know some basics, right? You need to know the language of music. So in the same way, film appreciation is based on the idea that to appreciate a film as a film and not as a literature or something, right? Because what is cinema is different from what is a novel or what is a poem. So that the experience of watching the film is a pleasurable one, all-encompassing one, rather than only taking the story but not being able to appreciate the visual, audio-visual sort of experience of it. So that is film appreciation, and usually, if you haven't had some kind of training in that, it's very difficult to work, with cinema, in a serious way, right? One should get that kind of appreciation. The Film Television Institute offers every year a course which does that. And also they even they even go, if you invite them, they come to your place and give you 1 week or 2 weeks appreciation courses. Now that's one. The second part of film education is, so film education I'm saying is a bigger category which includes film appreciation and this other thing, which is how to be a critical sort of spectator of the cinema that you cannot avoid watching. That is the popular, the other kind. That is how to respond to it with, with some distance, with some sense of what it's trying to do to you, right? That is, the understanding is that the commercial cinema, like, the great theorist, media theorist Adorno, and Horkheimer, together, they spoke about the characteristics of contemporary modern media, in which they made some very, very negative evaluation of media, saying that it basically simplifies, what is the word, dumbs down, culture and makes it into easily swallowed, baby food like something, so that culture becomes stripped of its those qualities which make it a socially, interesting, necessary, element, right? Something which renews society, renews our relationships, etc. Something that challenges existing. But in the process, they made as I said, a very negative sort of evaluation, which other people, like even somebody like in his own Frankfurt school, like Walter Benjamin, had a slightly different idea about it. He said, machines, there is a new man, there is a new human being, right, coming into existence. This human being is at ease with technology. Technology, industrialization has changed the world. The working class in those days, as they put it. I mean, the working class was a reality in Europe, even though in India we have never really had that kind of the working class in that sense. So, our society hasn't experienced that until recently, of course. We'll come to that later. So he said, here is this new person for whom everything is available. So, famous example, which later some John Berger sort of gave, illustrating Benjamin's point is, he said, look at this person's wall. You got one photograph that he or she took. Next to it is a little museum copy of Mona Lisa, right? The painting. Then there is some letter written by somebody to her or him, yeah. And there's some other modern, contemporary impressionist sketch, something, right? And so on. So this means that a new way of relating to art has come into existence, right? So your relationship, going to the Louvre in France, Paris, paying, I don't know, I think $200 or something you have to pay to get in there, or 500, I don't know. I once went all the way to the gate, but I couldn't pay the fees. I never went to the Louvre. You have to pay that much, you have to go there and see this thing called Mona Lisa. So this whole aura, as he called it, of this image, that it has some magic hidden in it. If you look at it, then you sort of partake in that magic, that kind of thing. But when it comes and suddenly it's pasted on your wall, it's good. I mean, it's not that you don't like it. That's why you're keeping it there. But it's not, you're quite happy to look at that and, instead of going all the way to the Louvre, etc. So that means, in a sense, the art object has become, your relation to it is more intimate. It's not, you're not separated from it, this wall of aura, magic, sanctity, etc. It's like, you can take it, hold it, and, look at it. You can draw a mustache on it also, as often people do. And so the engagement with art becomes transformed. So what is he saying, as opposed to Adorno's sort of thesis of passive receptivity, he's saying, and he started to say it, but other people also developed on it. He's saying there is a new kind of active engagement with art. That is, people make what they want of it, but so the question of appreciation acquires this new kind of active dimension to it. That is, appreciation as a way of doing something, not as the receptivity, that is happy to remain, uninterfering kind of reception, non-interfering kind of reception, but a more active one, which we are seeing in this age of this free availability of technology. The kind of reception that the field of reception is full of activity rather than act of the sitting back and saying, okay, I take this in, I appreciate it. It's full of activity. You take something, you will not let go of it without doing something with it, right? And then you'll put it out and so on. So this kind of change is chaotic change. That's what is the idea. This change is chaotic. Now, Benjamin might say this change is chaotic and this chaos is exciting. That is, we don't know what will happen, let what will happen, happen. But that was in the more, optimistic days of the early 20th century. Later, we've seen, the devastating wars which destroyed the world, and we have rebuilt, and now new wars have started, and so on. So, in other words, there's no way of saying something is in itself good or bad. No, just because this new kind of reception is possible, you can't say, well, this is it. Now we have become a new kind of person. If that's the case, then we can't explain how we have been having devastating wars continuously since then. So, in other words, this, these are some examples I'm giving of how, alongside appreciation, there is this other concern to understand commercial and, that is culture that is disseminated through corporations. Right? Now, culture, they will disseminate this culture. You will find yourself, at the receiving end of it. That, and people say, even if you don't go to the movies, you are affected by it. That's how pervasive they are. So, in the context of such pervasiveness of corporate disseminated culture, film education says we must learn to read these texts. And we must learn to read these texts to see how they operate, how they work, right? What they do, in what way they appeal to us, our participation, right? How do we get hooked to it? For instance, I don't know if you've seen, sometimes, occasionally, there will be, say, an art film screening. It's a good film. It's showing somebody who happens by chance to go into that cinema, thinking some film, who has never seen one of that kind of a cinema before. They will find it very difficult to, make that connection which makes the film intelligible to you, isn't it? The same can happen to people, if you, I know many people who are, very highly educated, and they are used to watching, English or Hollywood films or art cinema. If you put them in front of a Bombay, film, they find it difficult. There's no, you can't engage with it because it's just, so there is a connection that's made. So that means a lot of films are capable of making connections to a lot of people. The fact that some people don't fail to make that connection is proof that those who do make the connection are doing so on the basis of something that film is giving you, offering you, which appeals to you. Right? Something you understand. Right? This is what ideology is. Right? What is ideology? Ideology is that which, when you see it, that instant recognition, you say, like, when you're in a foreign country, you're wandering around, if you are from India, and, you don't know what's going on, you don't know the language. Suddenly, if you see Udupi hotel, that's that relief you get. It's that kind of a thing, if you like. There's something it says to you. You recognize yourself in its call. The board, Udupi Hotel, is a call. It says, are you the one? I've been waiting for, and then you say, hey, yeah, I'm coming, and so on. That's what Althusser, Louis Althusser, this theorist of ideology, he said, it's called interpellation. To interpellate means to call, to make a call which gets a response, right, from the subject, the person on the street, right? So he said that there's a typical scene, example he gave, said, a policeman says, hey you, there's a cop on the street, and I'm walking, and I turn, and he says, when you make the turn, you have been interpellated. You assumed it's for you, right? That is, you are responding to a call. So that is as far as a kind of general picture of ideology is concerned. I've just given a very, only one aspect of it. There are many other theories. It's a very complicated thing. You can pursue it if you want. But ideology, in my understanding, is something like this. So now the other aspect of my paper, I was going to do two things. One is to present ideology in a general format, and then to talk about specifically Indian cultural context and what is happening in this in our world. So ideology, as I said, ideology needs to be reproduced constantly, and culture, whether it is written or cinematic or TV or any other thing, is all contributing in some way to this reproduction of ideology, right? So what is ideology? We said that which makes the world familiar to us, that, makes the world recognizable. Every morning when you get up, if you were to say, if you imagine if you were to lose your memory, every morning you get up and see some, things all around you. You have to get used to them all over again. That would be, a hard thing to do. Instead, when you get up, you know what you see. You recognize it instantly, right? And you are used to this. Yeah, time to get up and go to work, yes, and so all of these things that we accept as normal, that's what I said. Ideology is the normalizing kind of agent in our culture, in culture, that which allows us to feel secure because we recognize everything around us. And when you see a cinema, you recognize it. I mean, imagine that these films are not, you are not identifying with that cinema because they look like you or they act like you. They don't, as the speaker said earlier. They're not like you or anything. They are dancing. They are wearing luxurious clothes, and they are all rich people. They're living in huge bungalows. But so recognition doesn't come from saying, "Oh, you are like me." It comes from saying, "Oh yes, this is the world and I belong here, and everything is as it should be. You should be there and I should be here, etc." So to accept your own difference from the domination. That is ideology, not the idea that we are all equal. You and I do the same thing, think the same thoughts, etc. That's not necessarily the case. In some cases it may be, but in other cases it's like you are greater, you are more powerful, I am less powerful, I am poor, etc. Such, that is the true nature of things. That acceptance, that kind of, that's ideological work. So how are we doing for time? Just 10, 15. So having done, kind of broad and crude picture of what ideology is, I will now say a few things about Indian context. Now, one thing to keep in mind is ideology doesn't change every day, right? Ideology doesn't change, so easily. Dominant ideology is a concept in ideology studies. What is dominant ideology? That which prevails most pervasively, covers most people at any point of time in a society. Right? That's dominant ideology. Now, for instance, Raymond Williams, he said, in any society at any point of time, there are three elements which form part of the mix, which is residual, dominant, and emergent. That is, there are certain things that are residual, old. Today, if we say today, the dominant ideology is of a particular kind, then in this society there will be people, there will be discourses which belong to an older period, but which still remain in their, they're trying to struggle, survive in the, against the dominance of the dominant. And in the same society, there can also be new things which want to overcome the present dominant and move towards something else, a new status, right? We all know, that in India, if we know that the question, it's easy to identify, but at the same time, it's a bit tricky to identify, because the idea is not that, for instance, traditional is residual, or modern is dominant, or socialism is emergent. It's not that kind of an easy thing to do, but you can recognize what is residual if you pay attention a little more. But we'll come back to that. The idea is that in relation to a particular project that I and some of my colleagues are doing about contemporary cinema, that was the other part of my title. The contemporary cinema, what's happening today in the movies? Something new, interesting is going on. So the idea is, while ideology doesn't change every day, there has been a change in the recent past. That is, a change has begun to occur in the recent past. That is, if you look at, say, if you go back to 60s, 70s, 80s cinema, and then you compare it with what's going on today, 2000s, 2010s, etc., there is a change. And the idea is that this change is infrastructural. That is, it's a change at the very base of the cultural discourse, or the cultural apparatus, if you like. That means what is happening can be periodized. That is, periodizing means to associate changes with historical, sort of points of rupture. So anyway, my own sense is that in the 90s we began, late 80s, some say late 80s it already began, but officially it began in 90s, so we can stick with that. In the 90s, India began a full-fledged capitalist existence as an economy. And I think if you look at the cinema of today and compare it with the cinema of that time, there is a palpable sort of sense of change at every level of the cultural text. One example is in the new kind of cinema that we are seeing today, bodies are differently disposed towards each other than they used to be in those films. People orient themselves to the world in different ways than they used to in those times. Women's roles tend to be different today than they used to be. Caste has become a primary concern, right? In all of these things, what is happening in a way is a kind of under capitalist pressure, that's my hypothesis anyway, a kind of recentering of the self is happening. That is, human subjects are having to orient themselves to the world by by themselves. That is, here I am and here is the world, not here I am and there's my leader, or here I am and there's my family. You know, you are part of different collective orientations in the past. Today, there is increasing pressure under capitalist sort of developments for that self-centering, as it were. That is, you have to, relate to the world as yourself, not with all those other collective identities with which one used to participate in the world. Right? It's an interesting thing in Hyderabad. If you go to the old city, and if you ask for directions, they'll say, go straight and turn left. Like that. It's the opposite. Yeah? It's always a common thing. Go straight and turn left. This is so consistently, it's happened. So what is this? I'll go straight and turn right. Same. Same thing. Then I realized, actually you are saying, not my left, but the left of the other. So you are orienting yourself to a greater power than yourself. Up there is someone else, right? So, in a despotic situation, which was the case in the, earlier Nizam rule, as in any rule, any monarchic rule, the subject is not free to orient themselves around themselves as bodies. Your orientations are dependent upon who is there, who's your, powerful, the person, our collective of which you are a part. So it's only within that you have your own specific space. So I can't say, well, I'm here, I'm the center of the world, this is my left and this is my right and so on. This is a new way of thinking, which is kind of related to what capitalism does to human bodies by turning them into deposits of labor power, basically, right? Individuals of that kind. So this is something which you can see reflected in a lot of the new cinema, and which you can retrospectively see as completely absent in the kind of cinema of the past. I wish I could show you some of these things, but I can give you one or two examples of people of cinema in which this kind of urge to free your own body from its entanglement in these traditional collectives is one of the driving forces of the story itself. You might have seen a film called Masan. I don't know, have you ever seen, how many of you, no, not seen. It's one of the very interesting new films. In Masan, this is a story. This is basically the idea that freeing this girl who experiences, she's working somewhere, so she's already a new subject because she has to work. This film is set in Banaras, a very traditional society, although her father is a very indulgent man. But she wants to relate to her body as herself, not as something that belongs to somebody, the father or the family, who have final authority as far as how to deal with them is concerned. Now you may say, well, such love stories are there in the past also, but in those days, such love stories were always, they had a medieval quality to them, They were like Laila Majnu type of, extreme violence and other things. That's here. So the lovers become the object of various people's attention. Here, The story is, again, as I said, told from the perspective of this body that wants to find its own internal adequation between who she is as a subject in her own understanding and this body on which claims are being made by the family and others. So when you tell the story from that point of view, it's a different one than all those other love stories which were told from this social angle, you know, the big drama of romance which is destructive. So, as I said, I wish I could show you, but this is, in my view, one of the symptoms, signs that there is a major ideological shift that we are witnessing, that we are part of today, and some of you may not even, you know, see it as a shift because you're in it, you know, young people like you. You may not perceive it in the way that I'm perceiving it, because there's a sense in which, you know, one sees something else, lives through it, and then you see actually, you know, in India, that's what's happening, you know, and that's why also you see in the political field and everywhere a new kind of energy, a new kind of, you know, enthusiasm that is showing in our, you know, in recent times, in recent days, and all of this, I feel, is part of that dismantling of the traditional structures that for which capitalism has been traditionally, historically, one of the major forces. You know, in Marx's text, capitalism is at once the greatest liberating force and the worst dominating force. It's both, right? And what is its liberating potential? Where does it come from? As the Communist Manifesto said, all that is solid melts into air when capitalism takes over. That is, capitalism destroys all traditional, you know, relationships, institutions, and everything. And sometimes you can think of the aggressive traditionalism as actually a response to that threat that capitalism essentially poses, where capitalism, you know, where it says people, to each subject, you have nothing to fall back on but yourself, you know, that kind of a thing. And that's my sense is today, that's the ideological shift that we are seeing.